and diabetes. And we call it a double whammy because they actually are closely related. They're both autoimmune diseases, and we tend to see autoimmune diseases travel. They like to travel together. And diabetes and celiac disease particularly are travelers that love to hang out together. So we're going to go through this part quickly because a lot of you sat through the last session. We will make sure that these slides are available. We will either email them to you or somehow get the information to you. So celiac disease is, in terms of kind of a brief overview, it is an autoimmune disease. It does affect 1% of the population. Primarily affects the GI tract, but it can also affect the skin, your neurologic system, your cardiovascular system. It can affect any part of your body. And the reason it can affect any part of your body is because it affects your small intestine. If this was a crumb of gluten, it actually crosses the small intestine, which it shouldn't do. When you think about your digestive process, your food should all be broken down into the very, very basic building blocks. So you shouldn't have a large chunk of gluten crossing over through the intestinal wall. But what it does is it actually hooks up with the HLA DQ2 and DQ8 gene. So celiac disease is genetic, so there's actually that gene links and locks in with the gluten and creates T cells, which, like T cells like from cancer-forming cells and things, will form plasma cells, lymphocytes, antibodies, cytokines, and that does damage to the small intestine. And that's before we were talking about the difference between celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. In gluten sensitivity, we don't see this damage of the small intestine. In celiac disease, it is this autoimmune cascade that actually causes damage. What that damage looks like is this. This is what your normal intestine should look like. You should have all these wonderful villi that stand up and capture all the nutrients as they go through your small intestine. Okay, now I know you didn't think you're going to be doing biology again on Saturday morning, but the reason it's important is that those villi are there to stand up and capture those nutrients. If they're flattened, that means not only is gluten getting in, but all the calcium you're eating, all the protein you're eating, any of your medications are not being absorbed. So with diabetes, your erratic blood sugars are related to the erratic way that you tend to absorb things. Your thyroid medication, if it's not easily controlled, it's because we're not absorbing it routinely. And what will happen is that if you have a meal that's less gluten or carbohydrate containing and more protein and vegetables, you absorb a little bit better because we don't have this chronic inflammation. So that what the damage that's happening is actually going to affect all of your other body symptoms. And if you're not absorbing protein and calcium, guess what? Your bones are going to be affected, your blood work is going to be affected. There's lots of impact. Now, we know historically that celiac disease is as common as 1% of the population. That's a well-known fact if you live in Europe. It's becoming slowly but surely a known fact here. Here we're actually in the U.S. faced with kind of a dilemma where celiac disease and a gluten-free diet has taken on this kind of fad, star-studded kind of a thing where the latest heroes, sports stars, they're all doing gluten-free because they all think they're going to lose weight and be healthy, and there's no link to that at all. So gluten-free diet for celiac disease is a medical necessity and totally different. But we do know it affects 1% of the population. It doesn't matter where you're from, Ethiopia, Africa, Ireland, northern India, the Philippines, it's 1% of the population. So the classic presentation of celiac disease as we know it is weight loss, abdominal pain, diarrhea, but only about 60% of our patients actually present with these kind of symptoms. And typically, they are the young patients. So we see more kids presenting this way than adults. What this looks like is like this little guy, okay? And that may seem really harsh, and you can say, but that doesn't fit me. The reason I show this is because this is what our little guy looks like 6 months later on a gluten-free diet. So what does that tell you is happening? That intestine's getting better, they're absorbing, they're doing well. And that's the real positive note, that on a gluten-free diet, no matter how hard it may be, this is what's happening. Now, we may not all look as plump and chunky as this little guy, but know that your insides are now doing that well, okay? So that's important. It's kind of the bonus. Now, for a lot of us, and especially when we see celiac disease being presented with another autoimmune disease, often we see these other presentations. We see anemia, we see reflux, we see weight gain, we see early osteoporosis, we see neuropathies, the tingling of the hands and feet. And with diabetes, you often see a lot of these similar things, so celiac disease can be missed. And it's important to, if you have type 1 diabetes, that you are tested annually for celiac disease. Okay, now, that's kind of that basic background, but what is gluten? Gluten is that specific protein that's found in grains. Now, it's a generalized term, and it can be corn gluten, rice gluten, wheat gluten, barley gluten, so we need to make sure that when we're talking about a gluten-free diet, we're talking specifically about the protein found in wheat, rye, and barley. And we use that little Legos kind of description because that protein in wheat, rye, and barley has a very specific amino acid sequence. It's like putting 33 Legos together, and they have to line up in exactly the right way for it to cause the damage that we see in the intestine. And that's why you can eat rice, potato, quinoa, amaranth, and they don't bother you at all. Even buckwheat. Buckwheat is related to asparagus. It's not related to wheat at all. So it's just the wheat, rye, and barley protein that we need to watch out for. But it's just generally called gluten. The diet for celiac disease is a diet for life. But I'm going to ask you, how many people were on a diet for something other than celiac disease before? For diabetes, for hypertension, for weight loss, for anything? How good are you on that diet? I'm not going to report to anyone, okay? But the important reason is that when we see with celiac disease what happens in our intestine, we no longer have that option of, I can cover it with my insulin, or I can watch my medication. This is something you have to be that strict with 100% of the time. So we're not given that luxury of saying, it's a holiday, or it's my birthday. And it doesn't work that way. It's 24/7. So, but gluten-free and diabetes, really, not only do we have this double whammy because you have the gluten-free diet and you have to watch your blood sugars. Whether you're on the pump or you're doing injections or whatever it is, you've got to mesh the two. And where this becomes difficult is that often when we think of diabetes, we're looking at what? The carbs and the sugar. But we tend to be very narrow. How many people look at a box and almost don't look at the ingredients but go right in, zone right in? How many carbs has it got? How much sugar has it got? Yeah, because it becomes like that's your focus. I'm going to tell you, I want you to step back and take a much broader look and look at that whole package, because that's going to be important from the celiac part. What's important is that 2 to 10% of people with celiac disease may have diabetes, but that number is the same if we reverse that sentence and say that 2 to 10% of people with type 1 diabetes can also develop celiac disease. And it's kind of like the chicken and the egg. We don't know in many patients, like your son, who is just diagnosed with both, which comes first. Does the diabetes develop because we've been malnourished? Or does the celiac disease develop because there's been a breakdown in the digestive system? We just don't know. So, yeah. Actually, there isn't the link because type 2 diabetes is not considered an autoimmune disease. So you can have both. Just because you have celiac disease or type 2 diabetes doesn't mean that you get excluded from the other. Just like I tell many people, you have celiac disease doesn't mean that you're not going to have other food allergies or hypertension or something. Unfortunately, just because you got one doesn't mean that you're immune from anything else. But type 2 diabetes doesn't have this same genetic link with celiac disease. Okay? The food part that we're going to talk about, though, does relate. Okay? All right. So type 1, it's often diagnosed before celiac disease or gluten intolerance. Often the addition of celiac disease presents in different ways. If you're type 1 first, what we often find is that where you've had good control and you're doing well, all of a sudden, this would be true for type 2 diabetes also, all of a sudden your blood sugar control is not as good. And we find the highs and lows are very unpredictable. And they tend to be related more to what you're eating rather than when or anything else. So that if you had a big pasta dinner, all of a sudden your blood sugars are going to spike well beyond what you would normally anticipate. Or if you have a meal that's more just protein, fruits, and vegetables, you may actually dip too low, because again, there's that imbalance in what you're absorbing. We also find there can often be gastroparesis, which is that slowing down of the gut and that really delayed emptying of the stomach. And we find that often when we're diagnosed with both type 1 diabetes and celiac disease. So the gluten-free diet, do we need to go over basics, or are you good with the diet? Should we go through it quickly? Okay, basics are you need to change the breads, the pastas, the crackers, all of that. The good news is, though, there is all kinds of great things that are safe. Your dairy, your meats, your fruits and vegetables, your oils, your butters, nuts, legumes, those are all perfectly fine. And when you look at that, that's actually an easy part of the diet from a diabetes perspective too. So if you think of eating really, really healthy, like American Heart Association, American Diabetes top diet would be lean meats, fruits and vegetables, your grains and nuts and dairy. That works perfectly for gluten-free as well. So that if we look at that as the core of our diet and adding in those gluten-free products on the side, then you should do very, very well. Okay, in terms of a gluten-free list, there's often a lot of misinformation out there. And foods like vinegar, caramel coloring, citric acid, spices, maltodextrin have all been on the no list on a gluten-free diet for years. They're safe. They're absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with this. Anything that is distilled like a vinegar or an alcohol has the protein removed, and it makes it then gluten-free, so it's safe. Things that you do need to watch, and would be when you think about your diabetic diet anyway, would be things to eliminate, would be anything packaged or boxed. Anytime a manufacturer packages or boxes or processes a food, what do? You add more wheat-based flour, you add more sugar, you add more fat, you've got to add preservatives, all stuff that's not really what you want in your food. So if you think of anything packaged or processed is potentially gluten containing, it's also probably not the healthiest choice too. So we can kind of look at these products as being iffy from many, many aspects. Anything that is labeled low fat, you need to question, because if we're taking the fat out, manufacturers have to put something back in to give it the same taste and consistency. And often it tends to be either malt or wheat-based products. So we need to watch those. There are also hidden sources of gluten, and one of the biggest ones are medications, whether it's a prescription medication or an over-the-counter medication. When you think of your little aspirin, the amount of that acylic acid that's in there, that's that active ingredient, is really, really tiny. The rest of it is just filler to give you something to swallow, okay? So all that inactive ingredient is often wheat-based. Doesn't have to be. It can be corn-based, but it can be wheat-based starch. So we need to make sure that you're looking at your medications, because that's another reason why your blood sugars and your absorption can be, you know, like a roller coaster, because you may be getting daily doses of wheat in the medications you're taking. There is a great website, and it's glutenfreedrugs.com, and it's just all lowercase, just write out glutenfreedrugs.com, and it's run by a pharmacist, and he actually updates it almost monthly, and he will give you a complete listing of both over-the-counter and prescription drugs that are safe and easy to use. Other things you need to watch for would be cake icing, soy sauce, Play-Doh. All of these kind of food products have wheat in them. I know we don't think of soy sauce being very thick, but there is wheat flour added to thicken it. For kids, any of your arts and crafts stuff, most of it's wheat-based. Now, where that's a problem, from Play-Doh to paper mache to paints, is we only have kind of one kid here who's too big to eat stuff, but it's on your hands. And you're too big to eat your Play-Doh, right? Okay, good. But you have to make sure that after art class you go and wash your hands. Now, the teachers all say, oh, we have the sanitizer in the classroom. That may get rid of bugs and germs, but that's not going to get rid of gluten. You actually have to go and physically wash your hands with soap and water to get the gluten and the Play-Doh off. Why this is important is that little bit of residue on your hands, on the desk where they eat lunch, that can be that crumb of gluten that gets in that will cause damage and cause symptoms. So we need to be that careful. For younger kids, it's very, very important that your bath products, your suntan lotion, anything you slather on that child be gluten-free. Because when they're little, trust me, they drink the bath water, they lick their skin, everything goes in their mouth. So anything that's on them goes in their mouth, and it needs to be gluten-free. When you're older, you don't necessarily need gluten-free shampoos and soaps because you're no longer drinking the bath water, and that's okay. So the truth is, it's all about choice. Gluten-free diet can be very diabetic friendly, but we need to make sure that we really choose well. If you shop the perimeter of the store, you're going to be gluten-free and healthy, which is perfect. You also want to aim for the least amount of processed foods you possibly can. Again, not only is it good from a gluten-free point of view, it's also better from a health point of view. Less sodium, less fat, just better. There are a lot of naturally gluten-free products. And I know I stand up here and that may sound very funny because I do work for a manufacturer, but I'm going to tell you, the best way to eat gluten-free is to go naturally gluten-free products. The more processed it is, the more stuff that's added in it. You want it as clean as possible because that's the best for your health as well as for the control of diabetes. Okay, so go green or yellow or red, but focus on your fruits and vegetables so that we want to make sure that within that diabetic diet framework, we want vegetables, fruits, as much as you can. They're naturally gluten-free, but they also have all those other nutrients you need. They've got the fiber, they've got the phytochemicals, they've got all the antioxidants. The more bright colors you can get in your diet, the better off it is from a health point of view. And what is the recommendation? 5 to 6 servings of vegetables a day. How many fruits or vegetables? It's a combination. How many of you get 5 to 6 servings of your fruits and vegetables a day? Got to get them in. Now remember, a serving is a half a cup, right? So it's easy. Put them in. Now, if you need to be, and we're going to talk about being sneaky later, if you're making pasta, so chop up tons of vegetables and put it in the sauce, and we're getting lots more vegetables in the kids that way. There's ways to incorporate them in. On your fruit, watch the serving size, because that's easy. Vegetables, you can go overboard on serving sizes, but fruits have a higher carbohydrate content, it's a higher sugar content. Watch that portion size carefully. And you also want to make sure that you're choosing low glycemic fruits, things that have fiber, your apples, your pears, your oranges. Those are good choices, okay? Right. Protein sources. We want to emphasize lean meats. Now, if you listen to your meat boards, the beef company, the cattlemen and all that keep telling you red meat is really fine. Lean red meat periodically is fine. We don't want you eating hamburgers and steaks every day because there's just too many other stories that link the fats in the red meats to heart disease, to atherosclerosis, and the link is there. So yes, periodically red meat, but we want to limit it. Yes? Buffalo, perfect question. Buffalo is not like a beef because it is leaner and it has less of the saturated fat. So buffalo I would put in the category with chicken and turkey. It is a leaner, safer, less atherosclerotic type of a meat. So yes, buffalo would be different, as would elk, ironically. But beef, calf, and venison, thank you, and goose and duck would all be those things to really watch and limit, okay? Your fish. How many people are good about doing fish? Okay. And the fishier your fish is, mackerel, salmon, the better because it's got more omega-3 and 6. So if it's fishy smelling, it's just think, my arteries are going to love me. Because those are the fats that are very protective that actually, there have been several studies that if we can see an increased intake in those omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, that even without changing anything else in the diet, but you have more of that really fishy fish stuff, that we see your cholesterol and the bad cholesterol, the HDL or the LDL, go down without changing anything else, just by eating more really fishy fish. So lots of fish, the light meats, the bison, the poultry, those things. Also, be inventive. Why not use your beans, your nuts, your seeds, vegetarian chili, all kinds of rice pilafs with green peas and beans in it, other ways to get protein in that's not animal-based. And again, your nuts are good sources of your essential fatty acids, the omega-3s and 6s. Almonds are wonderful sources of omega-3s and 6s. And putting those into your meal, think of a nice summer salad that has your beans, your nuts, your dried fruits and things in it. That's a great satisfying salad. But now you've gotten something that's gluten-free, low glycemic index, good protein that has the right kind of fats, totally very healthy, okay? So we need to look at using more of those beans and legumes in as alternatives to the red meat proteins. Okay, we've done our fruits and vegetables, we've done dairy and protein. We did have to come to this part at one point. What about breads? Okay, they are an important part of your diet. The bread before you were gluten-free actually provided you with B complex vitamins and fiber, stuff that's good. When you read all the things about making sure you have enough fiber in your diet to help balance that blood sugar out, what do we think of? Well, Cheerios and oatmeal have been pushing their fiber content for years and years, and that's true. Can you find that in gluten-free products? You're going to have to look hard. You're going to have to really be careful. You want to make sure that you pick your gluten-free product very carefully. Many of them are based in, instead of a whole wheat flour, they're based on rice flour, potato starch, tapioca starch, corn flour, or cornstarch. None of those are really very good from a glycemic index point of view or from a nutrition point of view. They're all simple carbohydrates that turn quickly to sugar, and there's no fiber at all. So you need to really read that label carefully. So where we said before, when you honed in on a grain type product, you looked at the sugar and the carbs, right? Well, now I'm going to tell you, you need to look at that whole list. You want to look at the carbs. You also want to look at the protein, fiber, and what those ingredients are, because it's not just about the sugars. It's about that whole picture altogether. You need to read those labels very carefully. There are lots of naturally gluten-free grains, and I would encourage you to use them as much as possible. Whole brown rice is much healthier than plain old white rice. You've got bran, you've got fiber, and you've got more of your B complex vitamins, and that's really important. How many people have had quinoa? Okay, it is the best grain you could possibly eat. A half a cup, which is a serving, a half cup of quinoa provides as much calcium as a half a cup of milk and as much protein. So eating just that little half cup of quinoa as your side dish to your chicken or salmon or something yummy actually not only provides you that nice satisfaction for the starch, but you're getting better nutrition from it too. So those kind of grains are really good. You want to look for a fiber content of 2.5 grams per serving or more. Who knows how much fiber you're supposed to have in a day? 25 grams, okay? It is tough to get 25 grams of fiber on a gluten-free diet because the main source of your fiber on a wheat-based diet are your breads, and they easily provide 3 to 4 grams per serving. Your oatmeal, your whole grain cereals. On a gluten-free diet, you're going to have to pick carefully. Look for at least 2.5 grams of fiber per serving. You're also looking for lower sugar content. You can find bread and crackers with less than 3 grams of sugar, and you can find sweets like your cookies and things for under 10 grams. But again, make sure that it's a balance. Let's be honest. We're going to have our treats. What do you need to do to balance your treat out? What do you need to combine with that cookie? Protein. Protein. You want to either have a fat or a protein with it so you balance out that blood sugar rise, okay? So when you're first diagnosed with diabetes, what do they tell you to have as your evening snack? Peanut butter and crackers or something. Why? Because you want the protein to balance the carb in the cracker. But now on a gluten-free cracker, you can find some really good multi-grain gluten-free crackers that have more of that protein. So balancing it with the peanut butter or the cheese, you actually have even a better evening snack than if it was the wheat-based one. So see, there are good things. Yes? Oh, millet falls in the same area. It's a great grain. It's not as high in fiber as the quinoa and buckwheat, but it's very good. It would be a great alternative if you kind of put them on a scale of more fiber to less fiber. Your white rice would be down here. Your brown rice millet would be right by the rices, and then into your buckwheat and quinoa and such. Okay, amaranth is another one that's also very good, but a little bit lower on that fiber content, but very good sources. Other questions? Okay, we're good. All right, so when we talk about the grains, though, as I said, I asked how many people, and you guys were very good. I think this is the first group I've ever had where almost everyone said they had quinoa. I'm so excited. But what about buckwheat? Now, the name has nothing to do with the grain. It actually is really related to rhubarb or sorrel, not wheat at all. It's a good source of protein. It's a good source of B vitamins. But what do you do with it? Okay, there's actually a couple things. You can use buckwheat flour in baking. The buckwheat groats are like the steel cut oats, and you can cook those into a hot cereal. But how many people have all this time to do this? Okay, an easy way to use buckwheat groats is actually to buy a package of buckwheat groats and buy your brown rice and buy either quinoa or another grain and mix the three together and stick it in a jar on your counter. And when you're going to have a side dish, take a scoop of that and cook it as if you would cook rice. Now you have a rice pilaf that's loaded with nutrition and easy. Because we have to make this easy. If we make it too difficult, how many of us are going to do this? Not going to happen. But how easy is it to cook rice as a side dish? Piece of cake, right? So let's make our rice substituted and actually use, these are the groats. They're like little kernels. And if you add that to brown rice, it gives it a nice kind of different texture. It makes it like a rice pilaf and makes it very simple. So that would be an easy way to do it. If you bake it all, how many people bake? A few of you. Buckwheat flour can be substituted in as part of that flour mix. And again, that's going to enhance the nutrition quality of your baked product. Makes great pancakes. Makes great pancakes. It actually makes pancakes very healthy. The other thing that's kind of a traditional Jewish dish is, actually we'll go back to buckwheat for a second. What's it called? Pasta, this one, pasta varnishka, where it's actually pasta and buckwheat. And I know it sounds really crazy. You're adding two grains. It's bow tie pasta and sauteed buckwheat. It's an Eastern European dish. But because the buckwheat is so high in protein and fiber, that actually ends up being an acceptable meal even for diabetics. Isn't that bizarre? You would never think that, but okay. Millet, as you had said, is another great grain. It is actually different than some of the other grains in that it's actually a very good source of vitamin A and magnesium. Where the other grains are good sources of the B complex, millet actually adds the vitamin A that you need. It's light, it's fluffy, it's a very light kind of taste. This millet flour is perfect for baking. It is the lighter flour, so that combined with buckwheat flour makes for a lighter product. If you cook it as a side dish, it's a very small kind of a kernel. I find you need to add it to something because I try all this, I experiment on my 3 kids. And so their friends now still come over to the house and say, so what are we experimenting with today? So we tried millet, and they're like, well, they didn't like the texture of it alone. But if I mixed it with something, it was perfect. Millet is also great if you make a soup or a stew and add the millet in the soup or stew. It works really well. It thickens it a little bit and gives it that kind of pearlized pasta kind of. Yes, yep, absolutely. You could use it instead of barley. That would be a great substitute for it. And millet works that way because it is such a small little grain that it would be good under like a saucy kind of a dish or used in the soups and stews. Okay, quinoa. It's one of my favorite grains. It's very high quality protein, very high iron. If you think of it, it's really a wonderful grain that can be used in multiple ways. You can get quinoa and just cook it itself. There's a company called Ancient Harvest that makes a pasta using quinoa flour that actually holds up beautifully as a pasta. So now your pasta dish, instead of thinking pasta as, oh, my blood sugar is going to go up. This pasta actually has a good source of protein, a good source of fiber, so it's perfect for diabetics. It will give you a nice, even blood sugar. I find that this works great. You can cook it as a rice substitute and serve it hot, but what I find it really is great for is leftover for lunch the next day. If you've ever had couscous or like a tabbouleh type of salad, this makes the perfect gluten-free tabbouleh type salad. So we'll actually often cook it. Now I'll cook enough so my kids aren't wild about it cold, but to me it's like delicious, where I'll take that to work for lunch, and it works really well for that. It's great. Absolutely, right? I put like just balsamic on it and you're good to go. You had a question? Or are you just thinking? Okay. Actually, we've had some people complain that the quinoa has kind of a bitter taste or a metallic taste. Rinsing it does do that. I always worry about rinsing your grains because your B vitamins are water soluble. So if you're rinsing your grains, you're actually rinsing some of those good vitamins away. What I find, I often cook my quinoa in either a chicken broth, or I'll do a little bit more of a Middle Eastern flair where I'll put in dried cranberries or use an orange zest, chop up vegetables right into it. So then the quinoa itself doesn't have a lot of flavor, so it absorbs whatever you're cooking it with. And that way too, the leftover has this wonderful pungent taste already. Right. I find the bitter taste more with with the quinoa flakes. And there's something in the processing to a flake that when I tried as a hot cereal, and I couldn't do that. Quinoa itself, I find I do really well with. Now the quinoa also comes in different colors. There's a white one, there's a red one. There's no nutritional difference in them. It's taste. Okay. Teff is really, they call it a women's grain. It's from Ethiopia. If you think of your athletes, all our long-distance Olympic winners are actually Ethiopian. If you kind of look at those Olympic trials, all those guys, guess what they eat all the time? Teff. It is a wonderful, wonderful grain. This is called injera, which is the traditional bread for Ethiopia, and it is a perfect gluten-free bread. It is just made with teff flour. It's like a flat bread. If you like buckwheat pancakes, try this. It's just so delicious. But the thing is, it's naturally gluten-free, naturally low glycemic index, naturally low sugar, high fiber, a perfect kind of a bread for someone with diabetes and gluten and needing to be gluten-free. The grain is very, very tiny. You can cook it up as a porridge, as a side dish. I find it's just, have you used teff at all? Okay, in a bread or in a, right. Just as a side dish, I find it almost gets too sticky, like a porridge. But for the bread, it works great. The teff flour is fabulous, or as like a hot cereal in the morning. I also add it into other stuff, and it works well for that. In terms of the flours and things, what I find the best solution is, although bean flours are great in terms of their nutrition quality and content, they tend to be heavy, and a lot of people find that they make the breads and gluten-free products a little too dense. So what I find works really, really well is to combine them. The flour mix that I've found works best where I can make something. I've actually done this, it's really bad. I'll bring something into work and not tell people it's gluten-free, and they all eat it, they don't know. I actually sent cookies to my son in college. I made, Toll House cookies, but I used the flour mix of brown rice, chickpea, and sorghum. And his roommate got the box and knew that I send cookies all the time, opened it up, started eating them, had no idea that they were gluten-free. My son was a little disappointed because he's like, he can eat anything, and he ate all my gluten-free cookies. But the idea is that one flour alone isn't going to work from a gluten-free baking perspective, because when you take wheat flour, it's got a good protein content. So we need to substitute another flour in that has that protein. But your choices are very heavy kind of flours, the chickpea or the teff flour, the buckwheat flour, but that's too heavy by itself, so you need to blend it. But again, let's make life simple. Buy some brown rice flour, buy the chickpea flour, buy the sorghum flour, mix it up, put it in Ziploc bags, and either keep it in the freezer or the fridge so it stays fresh, and then you can just scoop as you need it, and you can use it as a one-to-one substitute are in any of your regular baking recipes. So you have banana bread or Toll House cookies, and it says 2¼ cups of flour. Now you can just scoop it out. Let's make life simple. Okay, recommendations. So for cereal, the gluten-free oats, the buckwheat, the amaranth, the quinoa, but taste that and see what you think. The side dishes, the quinoa, the millet, the buckwheat are great. Look for the pasta that's either the navy bean or the quinoa based, and the flours, use the mix. Another possibility, there's a lot of nut flours, which again would be protein based rather than carbohydrate based, and those are good, but again, they're heavy, so you need to kind of blend those. Okay, that didn't come out very well, but we'll make sure you have it. It's the carb counting for gluten-free products, and what we've done is you have some of your basics, but we've added in like some of the gluten-free breads would be 1 serving, where it would be 1 slice of bread. A half of a gluten-free bagel would be 1 carb exchange. The cookies, you only get, where'd they go? 4 of the table crackers, 6 of the round crackers, so you need to watch those carbs carefully. And we'll make sure that this is easy. Okay, the wheat-based diet we've done, and I know that we're almost out of time, so I'll make sure. Actually, what I'm going to do is skip ahead on this and ask if you have questions, because the last thing I want to go over is labels. Okay, lifestyle tips. Because just because you're diabetic and gluten-free doesn't mean that life shouldn't be good. So let's put it all together. In terms of general recommendations, moderation is very key, whether it's alcohol, chocolates or sweets, or fried foods. Limit them, make sure that you're doing good choices, but also balance. And think of this little guy here as a balance of bananas and pineapple and whatever, and he's perched very carefully on that branch. We want to think of our diet being the same way. Yes, have variety, but just make sure that you balance it. If you're going to have that carbohydrate, get the protein in there. Either have nuts with it or peanut butter, something to balance it out so we affect the blood sugar the right way. Also, we want to make sure that we're aiming towards a healthy weight. You want to achieve a recommended body weight and maintain it. However, look around the room. There are people that come from families of string beans and people that come from families that look like potatoes. And if your genetics are potatoes, you're not ever going to be a string bean. It's just a fact of life. So let's aim for the best body your genes can give you and work on that. And I think that there has to be a degree of acceptance. I come from a family of pears, so I'm blessed with them. They're not going anywhere. They're not ever going to go anywhere. I'm not going to be a string bean. So let's accept it, but make it the healthiest weight we can be. And what that means is activity. So everyone says you've got to be active, but we need to rethink activity. When we think activity, you don't have to be a gym bunny. We mean to be active. Choose something you like and do it. Gardening, walking, bicycling, whatever it is, enjoy it, but make sure that you do it routinely. That's the key. Do you like lifting weights? No, so don't go do that. Do something you do like to do, because the key is we want to balance the activity and the blood sugars. So pick something you like, and as long as you're moving, it doesn't matter what the activity is. It's more important that you're doing it on a routine basis, okay? So, 1, we accept our potato-shaped bodies because that's what we're given, so love them, but make them healthy by moving them. Then we're good. Okay, and on that, there's different websites and things that have good solutions, research centers, references, and we're done.